Good evening. Tonight we take you to one of the most volatile borders in Latin America, the frontier between Colombia and Venezuela. It is here, along dusty roads and tightly controlled checkpoints, that the Colombian army has been ordered to step up its presence. Armored vehicles, uniformed soldiers, and makeshift inspection points now define the landscape of a region long scarred by violence, drug trafficking, and political unrest. On Friday, Colombian army vehicles and soldiers were seen actively inspecting cars, stopping buses and patrolling border checkpoints. This was no routine patrol. It was part of a sweeping new order by Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who has vowed to take the fight directly to the criminal groups that dominate the borderlands. His target, the mafia forces in Catatumbo, a region infamous for its coca fields, drug routes and brutal armed clashes. Petro's decision is as ambitious as it is risky. On social media, the president revealed that 25,000 Colombian soldiers will now be deployed to Katatumbo. For context, this number represents one of the largest troop concentrations in Colombia outside of active war zones. The move signals both resolve and desperation, a recognition that years of half measures have failed to tame the lawlessness in this corner of the country. But not everyone is convinced. Voices from the Venezuelan side of the border have been quick to criticize Petro's actions. One frustrated resident put it bluntly, saying, "I don't agree with that sending military because Petro needs to worry more about the Colombian state than about others." That's clear and straightforward, right? Each with their own problem. If this man, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, doesn't want to resign and continues to persevere in staying as president of the Republic of Venezuela, even though he wasn't chosen, okay, so leave, gather your things, get going, and don't do more harm. Venezuelans have suffered a lot. These words capture the exhaustion of a population trapped between governments, trapped between armies, and trapped between promises of reform that often never arrive. Meanwhile, another layer of complexity is unfolding just beyond these borders. The United States has moved warships into the southern Caribbean, signaling its own intention to crack down on drug trafficking networks. Washington officials insist that the buildup is not about Venezuela directly, but about combating cartels that ship narcotics north through Colombia and beyond. Still, the timing and the optics are impossible to ignore. For the Trump administration, this issue has been a signature priority, securing the US southern border, cutting off drug flows, and leaning heavily on military power to do so. Though Pentagon officials have been tight-lipped about operational details, they have not denied that force could be used against criminal organizations if deemed necessary. In Washington's eyes, the cartels are not just smugglers, they are transnational threats that justify a show of force. Locals, however, see the US presence differently. One resident told reporters, "Well, yes and no. As long as they don't close the border, it's fine and doesn't affect us. But on the other hand, it does mean more surveillance and monitoring." That sentiment reveals the fine line between security and suffocation. For ordinary people, more soldiers often mean more checkpoints, more delays, and more scrutiny in daily life. In a surprising twist, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has welcomed Petro's decision. At a time when Caracas and Bogotá are rarely aligned, Maduro publicly praised the Colombian leader for his military reinforcement. To match the move, Maduro's government announced its own deployment, 15,000 Venezuelan troops to its western border with Colombia. The official reason? To fight the very same cartels that Petro says he is targeting. The optics here are fascinating. On one side, Colombia boosts its forces to historic levels. On the other, Venezuela mirrors the build-up with its own soldiers. On the surface, both governments claim to be combating drug trafficking, but the underlying politics suggests something deeper, a struggle for control, legitimacy, and influence along a border that has long blurred the lines between state and criminal authority. For decades, Katatumbo has been a battleground where guerrilla fighters, drug cartels, and paramilitaries operated with near impunity. The geography, dense jungles, mountain passes, and hidden river crossings has made it nearly impossible for either government to establish lasting control. Every new military deployment raises the question, will this time be different, or will history repeat itself once again? The stakes are not just national, but regional. The Colombia-Venezuela frontier is a corridor for narcotics heading north, for migrants fleeing crisis, and for contraband moving in both directions. Each checkpoint, each convoy of soldiers is part of a larger chess game involving not only Bogotá and Caracas, but also Washington, the cartels, and even international observers who warn that militarization alone cannot solve the deeper social and economic roots of the conflict. And for ordinary citizens, life is suspended between fear and fatigue. In Venezuela, hyperinflation, shortages, and political repression have driven millions to cross into Colombia. For these migrants, the sight of tanks and troops at the border is not a reassurance. It is a reminder that they may never find safe passage or stability. In Colombia, meanwhile, communities living near Katatumbo see the soldiers as both protectors and occupiers. Protectors against narco-violence, but occupiers who bring checkpoints, curfews, and suspicion. The US naval buildup adds yet another layer of tension. Critics argue that Washington's involvement risks internationalizing what is already a fragile standoff. Supporters counter that without external pressure, neither Colombia nor Venezuela can truly weaken the cartels, whose networks span continents and launder billions. So tonight, as soldiers stand guard under the floodlights of the border posts, the questions grow heavier. Can 25,000 troops in Colombia and 15,000 troops in Venezuela truly dismantle the cartels? Or will this militarization instead deepen the cycle of conflict? Can Washington's ships in the Caribbean deter traffickers, or will they spark a new confrontation with Caracas? For now, the answers remain uncertain. What is clear is that the Colombia-Venezuela border is once again at the center of a high-stakes geopolitical drama, one that mixes organized crime, migration, great power politics, and the everyday survival of millions of ordinary people. And so we end where we began, with the stark image of soldiers waving vehicles to a halt at a border crossing, rifles slung, radios buzzing, faces tense. It is an image that captures both the determination of governments and the desperation of citizens. Whether this latest surge of troops brings peace or provokes new dangers remains to be seen. This is your report from the Colombia-Venezuela frontier, where armies march, presidents maneuver, and a region holds its breath.